Courtney Hadwin stunned the world with her powerhouse voice, raw emotion, and unforgettable stage presence.
To now, your interaction with the audience, the confidence. I think this has been my favorite performance of you so far.
But what began as a meteoric rise quickly took a dark and unexpected turn.
That your health is your priority right now.
One that would leave even Simon Cowell, the industry's toughest judge, fighting back tears on live television. What happened to this once-in-a-generation talent? And why did it shake Simon to his core? Join us as we uncover the rise, the unraveling, and the moment that left the world and Simon Cowell in shock. The rise of a star. Courtney Hadwin's story didn't begin with red carpets or flashing cameras. It began in the quiet corners of Hartlepool, a small coastal town tucked away in northeast England where people measure time by the changing of tides, not headlines. Behind a modest brick facade, something extraordinary was taking shape, though no one could yet see it. Inside that unassuming home, a soundtrack was always playing. Etta James spun on vinyl, Janis Joplin cracked through CDs, and Courtney's father hummed along under his breath while washing dishes. For young Courtney, music was more than background noise. It was escape, expression, and elevation. The voice of her mother often mingled with the records that filled the rooms, creating a constant thread of melody that wove through her early childhood. But it was her father's love for classic blues and soul legends like James Brown that particularly stood out. Courtney, however, was the kind of child who rarely demanded attention. She was more prone to absorbing the world in silence than shouting above it. Her teachers often described her as reserved or shy, but there was something coiled within her, an emotional depth that few noticed, but none could deny once she began to sing. Music for Courtney became an outlet for her inner emotions, a way to express feelings she couldn't quite articulate in the outside world. The songs she absorbed weren't just tunes on a radio. They were lifelines, moments of connection with something bigger than the ordinary life around her. And when she sang, even in the privacy of her bedroom, it was as though she became someone else entirely. The shy girl from Hartlepool disappeared. In her place stood something raw, powerful, and magnetic. A powerhouse channeling the spirit of the legends who had shaped her musical world. In those early moments, the world around Courtney never knew that a star was being quietly born. The people in Hartlepool, where life moved at a pace that felt untouched by the rush of the world, had no idea that one of their own would soon be standing on some of the most prestigious stages in the world, singing with a voice that could shake the foundations of the music industry itself. Behind the closed door of her room, a metamorphosis occurred. Headphones in, lights dimmed, and mirror slightly fogged from nervous breath, Courtney would let the music possess her. She rehearsed not for an audience, but for something deeper. Each note she sang wasn't copied, it was claimed. She wasn't just learning lyrics, she was living them. Her voice, raspy, soulful, aching, carried the weight of heartbreak, longing, and liberation far beyond her years. Influenced by a blend of blues, soul, and classic rock, she didn't sing like a girl discovering her voice. She sang like a woman who had already found it. Her parents began to notice. It wasn't just the vocal strength, it was the conviction, the way her eyes would glaze over as she sang, completely lost in the world the song built around her. Courtney didn't sing at people. She pulled them into her realm, demanding they feel with her, hurt with her, breathe with her. To her, music wasn't about applause. It was about connection. And while she never asked to be in the spotlight, it was already starting to find her. The power she held was impossible to ignore. It was the kind of voice that made people stop in their tracks, the kind of voice that would leave audiences speechless, and one day, even move Simon Cowell to tears. Because sometimes a star doesn't explode into fame. Sometimes it burns quietly until the world finally catches fire. The golden moment.
Well, time for you guys to check her out. This is her shot at the semifinals. Here's Courtney Hadwin.
When Courtney Hadwin took her tentative first steps onto the America's Got Talent stage in 2018, the world didn't know her name. But that was about to change in the span of 90 electrifying seconds. The stage was massive, the pressure suffocating. And as millions watched live and at home, Courtney stood there, a teenage girl with nerves fraying at the edges, her voice barely steady as she introduced herself. To the judges, it may have seemed like another shy kid with a decent voice. But within Courtney simmered something wild and volcanic, an energy barely contained beneath that quiet demeanor. Something no one, not even Simon Cowell, was prepared for. And the moment the opening riff of Otis Redding's Hard to Handle filled the arena, she unleashed it all. In an instant, everything changed. It was a transformation so sudden, so visceral that it seemed almost supernatural. Her body moved with a frenetic rhythm, as though channeling decades of soul and swagger and raw emotion into one moment. Her raspy growl shot out like a jolt of electricity, shocking the room into a stunned hush before erupting into a roar. This wasn't a performance, it was a possession, a musical exorcism. What people saw in that moment wasn't choreography or polish, it was pure release. The judges were floored, the crowd was stunned, then it erupted. Howie Mandel, recognizing the raw, untamed magic in front of him, didn't hesitate. His hand slammed the golden buzzer, and a moment of quiet anonymity shattered into a rainstorm of glittering gold. Confetti fell like a coronation from the heavens. In the wings, her family wept. On stage, Courtney's face was frozen in shock, eyes wide, hands trembling and transformed. This wasn't just her big break, it was her arrival. A universal validation that Courtney Hadwin wasn't just another voice among many. She was a force, a soul, not just born for the stage, but summoned by it. It was a moment so powerful, so unexpected that even Simon Cowell, a man known for holding back, sat speechless. He had just witnessed the kind of performance that doesn't come around often, the kind that leaves a mark, the kind you remember years later, not just for how it sounded, but for how it made you feel. In that golden moment, Courtney Hadwin didn't just earn the world's attention. She earned something far rarer, Simon's respect. And one day, it would be that memory, that moment, that would bring him to tears. Transitioning to fame. In the weeks that followed, Courtney's life shifted at breakneck speed. Headlines, interviews, viral videos, and sudden fame, she was swept into the whirlwind that comes with modern stardom. But what most didn't see was how turbulent that transition really was. Fame, after all, isn't just about recognition, it's about redefinition. And for Courtney, staying true to who she was became a constant uphill battle. In an industry that thrives on predictability, Courtney was an enigma. Executives weren't sure what to make of her. She didn't fit neatly into any pre-packaged category. She wasn't polished pop. She wasn't dance track mainstream. She was bluesy grit, emotional honesty, and unfiltered energy. And that scared people who didn't know how to sell it. Some industry voices suggested a makeover, toning down the growl, softening the edge, choosing safer songs. But what they failed to understand was that her voice was her identity. Stripping it down meant silencing the very essence that made her unforgettable. And Courtney refused to be reduced. It wasn't easy. Social media was both a blessing and a burden. Fans poured in with love and support, but so did critics. She was too much for some, too different for others. And beneath it all, she was still just a teenager, navigating the impossible task of growing up under a microscope. But through the pressure, through the noise, Courtney anchored herself in what had always been her compass: music. She returned to the songs that raised her. She leaned into songwriting. She played small gigs, honing her sound in intimate rooms where authenticity mattered more than auto-tune. And slowly, she began carving a space for herself, not on the industry's terms, but on her own. Because Courtney Hadwin never wanted to be a manufactured star. She wanted to be an artist. And in a world obsessed with chasing perfection, she reminded everyone what real looked and sounded like. Even Simon Cowell, the man who first watched her light up a stage, saw the fight she was quietly waging behind the fame, and in time, it would be that strength, that stubborn authenticity, that made what happened next all the more heartbreaking. Challenges of a rapidly growing career. The momentum Courtney gained from America's Got Talent wasn't just fast, it was meteoric. Overnight, the young girl who once sang barefoot in her bedroom with a hairbrush for a microphone was now commanding international stages, her voice echoing through living rooms across continents. But with every new spotlight came a shadow, the kind that stretches long and quietly follows. Fame, as it turned out, wasn't a staircase you climbed step by step. It was more like an escalator that shot upward at breakneck speed, and Courtney had no choice but to keep her balance or fall. Each appearance, each flawless vocal run, and each camera-ready smile came not only with applause but also with a growing weight of expectation. The world had crowned her a prodigy, and prodigies, people believed, don't change. They are perfect. In 2019, the release of the cover sessions marked her formal entry into the recording world. It was a debut that radiated promise. Her renditions of classics showed depth, maturity, and the raw vocal power that had made her unforgettable. Yet beneath the praise lay a hidden constraint. The project reinforced a version of Courtney that was quickly becoming outdated, even to herself. That same year, her return to AGT, the champions, reignited global buzz. The audience cheered as though time had stood still, as if the Courtney they had discovered years ago was preserved in amber, untouched by growth or self-discovery. But she wasn't the same. Behind the scenes, Courtney was experimenting. Her interests were no longer confined to the gritty soul of Janis Joplin or the electric force of James Brown. Behind the scenes, she was experimenting with alternative sounds, indie influences, layered production, and most of all, original lyrics that told her story. The problem was the industry didn't want evolution. It wanted reliability, familiarity. The girl with the gravelly voice and vintage style who could make a stage feel like 1968 again. This created a quiet tug of war. On the surface, Courtney smiled and nodded. She gave the interviews, wore the outfits, sang the songs, but internally she felt herself bending under the strain of two opposing forces, the person the world loved and the version of herself she hadn't yet fully revealed. She feared that stepping too far away from the formula might make her irrelevant, but staying in it made her feel invisible. It was like living inside a costume she had long outgrown. The tightrope she walked was delicate and exhausting. Too much originality, and she risked alienating the fan base that had lifted her up. Too much of the same, and she risked losing herself. And for a teenager still discovering the full shape of her identity, that duality wasn't just difficult. It was emotionally disorienting. She didn't just want to sing. She wanted to create, to tell stories, to be seen, not as a nostalgia act, but as a fully formed artist. And though few realized it at the time, this quiet conflict was already taking its toll. A toll that would soon catch up with her. One that would eventually bring even Simon Cowell, the man who first recognized her brilliance, to tears. The unexpected setback. By early 2020, the whirlwind had reached its peak. Courtney's schedule was packed with the kind of commitments most artists dream of. Studio sessions with seasoned producers, back-to-back interviews, live performances, and endless photo shoots. On paper, she was an unstoppable force, charting her way toward mainstream stardom. But off paper, she was unraveling. Sleep became a luxury. The days bled into nights and the weeks into a blur of deadlines and expectations. There was no pause button, no time to breathe. The performance pressure was unrelenting, and even her voice, once a source of joy and self-expression, began to feel like a burden. She started experiencing moments of anxiety before stepping on stage. Her vocal cords would tighten, her hands would tremble. She wondered if people would notice. Worse, she wondered if they'd care. And perhaps most painfully, she felt alone, completely alone.
Welcome to America's Got Talent. How are you?
A little bit nervous.
That's okay to be nervous.
The people around her, managers, stylists, and publicists, cared about the brand, not the person. Every decision felt like it came from a place of strategy, not compassion. She began to feel like a product. Her thoughts, her fears, even her exhaustion. None of it fit into the narrative they were crafting for her. She smiled for the camera, but in the mirror, she saw someone fading. Then, in a twist no one could have predicted, the world hit pause. The COVID-19 pandemic swept across the globe like a tidal wave, shutting down concerts, halting travel, and closing studios. Everything stopped. For many in the industry, it was a catastrophe.
Before the pandemic, the U.S. film and sound recording industry employed 456,000 people.
For Courtney, it was strangely liberating. At first, the silence was foreign. There were no stages, no makeup chairs, no directives, just stillness. And in that stillness, something profound began to surface. Courtney realized how truly exhausted she was, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. For the first time in years, she wasn't performing. She was just being. In the absence of a spotlight, she found a different kind of illumination. She picked up her guitar not for a crowd, but for herself. She journaled. She wrote melodies at 2 a.m. because she felt something, not because a label had a deadline. She began reconnecting with the girl who had once sung in her bedroom simply because it felt good. There was no camera watching, no audience expecting, just music, raw and unfiltered. And in that process, she came face to face with a difficult truth. She had never truly been given the space to grow up. She had been raised by an industry that moves fast, demands faster, and rarely pauses to ask how someone feels. The pandemic didn't solve her problems, but it gave her clarity, a glimpse into what fulfillment could look like if she dared to pursue it on her own terms. But clarity came with cost, because once you taste authenticity, it's nearly impossible to return to performance. Something had to change, not someday, but now. And as Courtney stood at the edge of that change, ready to rewrite her path, she had no idea the hardest chapter was still ahead, one that would shake everyone watching, including Simon Cowell himself. The shocking incident. But clarity doesn't always protect you from what comes next. As the world began to reopen and life returned to its relentless pace, so did the demands of Courtney's career. The quiet freedom she had found during lockdown was quickly replaced by the same pressures that once drained her, this time sharper than ever. And that's when it happened. An unexpected and deeply alarming development sent shockwaves through Courtney Hadwin's fan base and the wider entertainment world. Whispers began circulating through social media channels and entertainment forums. Courtney had been hospitalized, but beyond that initial shock, the details were murky, shrouded in uncertainty. No official statement was released. No insider sources came forward. Just a growing sense of unease that something was very wrong. As the hours passed without clarification, speculation took on a life of its own. Some suggested that Courtney had collapsed from sheer exhaustion, a burnout brought on by months, if not years, of relentless schedules, red carpet appearances, media tours, and behind-the-scenes work most people never saw. Others whispered about emotional strain, about the toll of perfectionism, high expectations, and living under a microscope in an industry that demands constant reinvention. There were even rumors, darker ones, of fainting spells or emotional breakdowns, triggered by the suffocating pressure of maintaining a flawless public image. The Courtney fans had watched Soar was now gone without explanation, and the silence was deafening. Her social media, once full of behind-the-scenes smiles and fan interactions, went dark. No reassurances, no updates, just nothing. And in that void, worry turned to fear. For Courtney's fans, it was devastating. For her colleagues, it was a grim reminder of how quickly the veneer of glamour could crack. In an entertainment industry that thrives on constant visibility, where absence is often equated with decline, Courtney's sudden disappearance struck like a thunderbolt. It wasn't just that she was gone, it was that no one knew why. What had happened behind those closed hospital doors? Was this the breaking point for someone who had always seemed untouchable, invincible even, in the spotlight? As the days dragged on with no news, the conversation shifted from curiosity to concern. Had the pressures of fame, the unrelenting expectations, the invasive scrutiny, and the constant performance finally caught up with her? For someone who had once seemed untouchable, invincible even, this was a sobering, brutal wake-up call. Courtney Hadwin wasn't just a prodigy, she was a person. And now, the world was seeing her not as a star on the rise, but as a human being in crisis. And this time, even the strongest in the industry weren't immune to the impact, Simon Cowell included. A rare emotional moment. Simon Cowell was no stranger to heartbreak in the music industry. Over the years, he had witnessed countless promising stars burn brightly, only to be extinguished by the harsh realities of fame, pressure, and personal battles. But Courtney Hadwin was different. She wasn't just another contestant or rising star. She was a prodigy, a force of nature wrapped in the innocence of youth, with a voice that carried echoes of legends long gone. From the moment she stepped onto the Got Talent stage, nervous and unsure, Simon had seen something in her that went beyond talent. It was soul. Untouched magic, the kind you don't manufacture, the kind you only witness. So when the devastating news broke that Courtney had fallen into a dark and difficult chapter of her life, Simon didn't react like a producer reading a headline. He felt it like a punch to the gut, and then came the moment no one expected. Simon appeared on a live broadcast during what was scheduled to be a routine segment about the future of talent shows. Observers noted a visible change in his demeanor. His usual confident expression was absent, and he appeared unusually subdued. When the conversation turned to Courtney Hadwin's condition, Cowell initially responded with measured, carefully chosen words. However, his composure began to slip, his voice faltered, and his posture shifted, reflecting visible emotional strain. In an unexpected moment, Cowell, widely known for his composed and often critical on-screen persona, became visibly emotional and choked up. "I've watched her grow," he finally said, eyes misted over. "She had something I don't think I've ever seen before. And to see her going through this, it's just..." His voice cracked. "It's heartbreaking. This is so tragic." The world is in shock as Simon Cowell breaks into tears on live TV after what happened to Courtney Hadwin.
The most important thing is your well-being and your health and your recovery, and on behalf of all of us here.
It was a surreal moment. For audiences accustomed to seeing Simon as the immovable judge, the emotion in his voice was jarring, even uncomfortable. He wasn't putting on a show. He wasn't promoting a record or defending a choice. This was real, raw. A man who had built an empire on discovering stars, now grappling with the fear of losing one, not to obscurity, but to life itself. What struck viewers most was that Simon wasn't talking about music anymore. He wasn't worried about record sales, chart positions, or tour dates. He was genuinely worried about her well-being, her survival. "She's more than a performer," he said, wiping a tear from the corner of his eye. "She's someone with a light inside her, and that light, it deserves to shine again." The moment went viral within hours. Fans from around the world flooded social media with messages of support for Courtney, but also with a newfound respect for Simon. Beneath the armor of industry politics and sharp commentary, people saw a man who genuinely cared, not just about Courtney's talent, but about the real person behind the voice. And in that rare, unscripted moment, Simon Cowell reminded everyone, perhaps even himself, that even the toughest hearts can break when someone they believe in is hurting. Moving forward, in the months following the public's concern over Courtney Hadwin's well-being, the focus gradually shifted away from her career momentum and toward her health and personal recovery. With reduced media attention and fewer public obligations, Hadwin was afforded the privacy she needed to recalibrate both emotionally and creatively. For the first time in years, the pressure to constantly perform, to impress, to be extraordinary faded just enough for her to recenter herself. The industry didn't forget her. Far from it. Her fans remained steadfast, flooding her social media with words of encouragement, and industry insiders whispered about her potential, hopeful she would rise once more. But for Courtney, the path ahead was no longer about fame. It was about the truth. Her truth. Throughout this period, Hadwin continued to write music privately. For her, music remained more than a profession. It was a form of grounding. Even as she stepped away from the spotlight, songwriting became a therapeutic outlet, allowing her to process her experiences and regain a sense of control over her narrative. Simon Cowell, who had previously shown emotional support during a live broadcast, reportedly remained in contact. Unlike many who had moved on to the next sensation, Simon stayed in touch, not as a judge or producer, but as a mentor who genuinely cared. His check-ins were gentle but consistent, never demanding, always encouraging. "Take your time," he would say. "The world can wait." Courtney's circle, though smaller than before, grew stronger. These were not just colleagues or fans, they were believers, friends, family, and creatives who saw the spark in her not because of her fame, but because of her fire. They nurtured her, shielded her, and gave her the quiet confidence to step back into the studio, not to replicate the magic of the past, but to forge a new, more authentic sound. As she matured personally and musically, Hadwin began to explore different styles and themes in her work. Early reports of new material suggest a noticeable shift in tone, reflective, raw, and marked by lived experience. These developments have fueled speculation about an upcoming album and a potential re-emergence into the public eye. Today, Courtney Hadwin is no longer seen only as a former America's Got Talent finalist. She is recognized as a young artist navigating the complex realities of early fame, mental health, and creative reinvention. Her journey has been unpredictable, but also deeply human. Whether the next phase of her career leads back to the mainstream spotlight or toward a quieter, more independent path remains to be seen. What is clear, however, is that her story is far from over, and the world is still watching, listening, and waiting. As Courtney Hadwin continues her journey in the music industry, one question remains. Will the pressure of fame ultimately define her career, or will she rise above it all? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching this video with us, and catch you in the next one.